Hey everybody, Quantum has returned, and in this video we are going to be covering a very budget-friendly version of Amber Emerald Aggro. As of October 2024, this deck is coming in at under $50 USD. Linked in the description will be the Dreamborn link for the full deck list. But the goal here is going to be kind of a deck building session. We're going to sleeve up this deck, covering our card choices and explaining why we think certain things may work. And then in subsequent videos, if your feedback is good, in those comment sections, if the likes on the video go up there, I can definitely post some follow-up with my Pixelborn matches, because I do plan to finally get into some Pixelborn webcam games. And we'll see, do we get absolutely stomped out, or can this deck actually put in the work? So again, let me know in the comment section below, but let's go ahead and start the process. Alright, so I know these Dragon Shields can be kind of a pain to open sometimes, but like I just mentioned, this is going to be a deck building session esque kind of video. So it may not be the absolute cleanest, but that's how we explore ideas and think about what might be good. You're going to see the real-time thought process. What I do want to eventually do, guys, is because this deck is actually relatively cheap to make, and I won't do it for this set since we have set 6 at this point coming out very soon. Maybe I can update a budget deck, take it onto Pixelborn, and do a giveaway for the deck, right? It'll probably be limited to the continental US and Canada. Ship it out to somebody, I don't know, maybe like YouTube members or something, do a little bit of a raffle. I do want to do something to give back, but yeah, let's take a look at these sleeves here. Oh, there's some damage on this one. What the heck? Oh my gosh. Okay, hopefully that's not like damage on the rest of them. Okay. Ooh, gotta inspect your sleeves, guys. That could be a mark. You saw me. These are freshly open. These could be like marked sleeves, right? Or you can get DQ'd at a official event. So, wow, kind of off topic there, but always important to kind of keep track of that. And you buy the dual matted one so that you actually don't get DQ'd, right? So that you have like the no translucent backing. Anyways, to start things off, we've got Pegasus as a 1-drop. And of course, we're going to be playing 4 of these. And the main reason why is the same reason why people would want to play Pascal in Amethyst decks, is basically this is a very good early quester that is kind of hard to deal with and can sometimes go unchecked for a number of different turns, getting you 3, 4, 5 lore. But also a very good benefit of playing Pegasus is that, yes, he has evasive, but he has a very good shift target as well in the bigger Pegasus, which we definitely are going to be playing. You'll see that later on. But as a 1 cost, Pegasus, very, very good card to drop on turn 1 and get some aggro pressure going right away. And being a common, it only costs like 10 cents, 25 cents a copy. So this might be like $1's worth of cards right here. Next up, we've got the Queen as another 1-drop. And so the Queen here, if you haven't guessed it already, also helps facilitate a very, very powerful shift line on turn 2 if you have the bigger Queen commanding presence, which of course we are playing. We'll get to that when we get up on the cost curve there. But the Queen represents a way for you to control the board, because as an aggro strategy, especially with this ink pairing, you don't actually have a lot of removal. And my apologies if there's a glare there, guys. I'll try to do my best to stay aware of that. But as a 1-drop package, you have basically a shift line or multiple shift lines that you're aiming to set up here. Speaking of which, as we move into Stitch, the same kind of thing applies. Because you're a budget deck and you're not playing Rapunzels and Clarabelles, which are very expensive, you need alternative effective draw engines. So I'm going to be testing and seeing if the Rockstar Stitch lines can still be effective, and that's again why we're playing so many shiftable 1-cost characters, because we do want to get some heavy hitters shifted out early. And this package allows you to say, if I have the 2 Pegasuses, maybe I go for that line. If I don't have that and I maybe have 2 Queens, I can go for that. Or if I have the double Stitch, which is probably what you want to go for to set up a draw engine early, that is what you can set up. What's nice too about a deck like this, it's very low to the ground, it's very easy to play. So if you're not a player who is really adept at the game yet, or you're still kind of learning, or you're just looking to learn more and you're still new to the game, this could be a great deck to pick up. Aggro decks generally are. Now the first money card of the deck is going to be Cursed Merfolk. And again, if you've been with me for a while, you know where I called out that this card was like under $1, and I said you guys should be picking up extra copies. And what is the card at now? Like 4 or 5 Canadian, maybe, I think. So kind of interesting that it's been going up. But this is still a great card for aggro strategies. It's pretty much a default for Emerald aggro decks and potentially even some discard decks. But it's your first 1-drop that is a non-shift target. And this is obviously going to be your best quester because it quests for 2, whereas these quest for 1. But again, depending on the matchup, depending on the scenario, if you're on the play or on the draw, which again, we can go over when we cover some of our matchups in the Pixelborn games. Do we want to try to maybe aggressively mulligan for a high quester? If we're on the play, it's usually better to get as much allure early on. If we're on the draw, we might be needing to set up for a little bit more of a grind game. And so setting up a control option like the Queen or a draw engine to make sure we have enough gas like Stitch, maybe something that we want to go for. Maybe not though. Maybe we just do need to straight up focus on aggroing out our opponent. But these lines, I think, will facilitate a decent way for us to develop turn 1. Now, because, as you saw from the 1-drops there, we play at least 12 Floodborn targets, I have opted for 3 morphs. Now, this card has come down a bit in price. The foils are actually going up. But I think last I looked, this was like a $2 card, 2 USD, 250 Canadian. So it's still relatively cheap, but it is a rare. So similar to Cursed Merfolk, it will be one of the money cards in the deck, which is crazy to say when you have some cards costing like $100 these days. Well, maybe not. Like Beast Tragic Hero non-foil and Robin Hood non-foil is, what, like 60 bucks each maybe? But regardless, yeah, morphs still relatively cheap and very friendly. Now, a card that really doesn't see play anymore is the old Chapter 1 Flynn Rider. Similar to Cursed Merfolk though, this card just helps you provide some good pressure with 2 questing power, but also gives you some trade-off when he's challenged and removed from the field and forcing your opponent to discard a card. So paired with Cursed Merfolk, this line is still very effective. You've seen it in, if you've been paying attention and watching any of the Disney Lorcana challenges, Emerald decks that focus on the Merfolk and Flynn lines still are very effective. Now, one of the cards that I was kind of on the fence about was whether or not I wanted to include the Ursula Deceiver. I think the card is definitely one of the best Emerald cards in the game, one of the best 2-drops in the game for sure. So in the end, I said, even though we're an aggro deck, we do still need to check some of those very powerful songs. And playing a card like this, you know, it's not like it's a no-brainer. Like, this isn't what you ideally want to drop on turn 2, let's say, but in certain strategic situations, being able to snipe out a Grab Your Sword, snipe out a Be Prepared, snipe out a very critical song from the opponent's hand at a certain time, depending on, you know, what you see them developing into, can be very important. And so that's why we have opted to play a very non-aggro card, more of a control card in an aggro deck. Again, you can disagree with that. You know, we're not playing Piglets, for example, because those have kind of skyrocketed a bit in price. We're not playing Lilos or Daisy Ducks, and those are obviously money cards that you could be playing in an aggro strategy. But when you're on a budget, you know, these 25-cent cards are going to fill the gap in a different kind of way. Next up, you know, okay, so these are foils. I do have non-foils coming to fill out this deck. So any foils you see are likely going to be replaced by non-foils because, like I said, I do want to like maybe give this deck away or something. But Bonsai is a card that's kind of been on the up. They should still only be around $1.50. Definitely a far cry from the 50 cents that they were. They've tripled in price, right, since 50 cents to $1.50. The foils are definitely gone up. They're up to like 10 bucks now. But still a very cheap card. I would pick these up because a 2-cost double quester that is a 3/2 body, normally you don't care, and it's actually, I don't want to say bad card design, but it's not something you want to focus on when you see a card having like multiple functions. How do I explain this that in a way that makes sense? Like, if you have a card that you want to, like, let's say you have a card that has Rush, right? And you're like, okay, I'm going to play this, I'm going to rush in with it. But it also quests for 2. So because it has Rush and it quests for 2, it's going to have lower strength and willpower, but a higher cost. And so it's not worth that trade-off because, like, I want to rush with it. And then, yeah, it's nice to have the questing power, but, like, I'm probably going to lose the card anyways after I've rushed with it. So when you look at a card like Maui, why it's so effective is because it's cheap for what it offers you, right? It costs 5, it has 6 strength. That's incredible value. It has Rush. You're not caring about questing with Maui. A card like this, it's overstated at a 3/2 body for 2, right? It's uninkable, that's the trade-off, but it also quests for 2. So that might seem like a contradiction based on what I just said, but in the context of an aggro strategy, the reason why Bonsai has been going up in price and is so valuable in Emerald decks, but because it has 3 strength, this card, while it does quest for 2, will also trade out something your opponent has. So think, for example, your opponent develops a Mim Snake onto, a good overstated card, Mr. Smee, a Mim Fox on turn 3, right? They lose tempo to develop the Mim cards. The Smee cards, developing it onto is also very strong, but the Smee trading out into this, they'll lose their Smee as well. So this card, I don't want to say is like a Mr. Smee necessarily, because Mr. Smee is definitely very good, but this card being able to, for Emerald, be an aggressive quester and then force a trade, similar to how, when you lose your Flynn Rider, you're forcing a discard, so you technically will go 1-for-1 with Flynn. You lose the board presence, but you discard a card from their hand. The Bonsai will trade out, ideally, by getting you the 2 lore, just like the Flynn would, and when it's exerted, when your opponent challenges into it, whatever they challenge into it with, they lose as well. So while you don't necessarily care that, this seems to be serving a dual function in that I can either attack with it since it's overstated for its cost, or quest, and again, sorry for the glare, guys, my apologies. You really want to utilize this card in the aggro sense, and why it's beneficial here for the kind of duality in having the overstated strength for the double lore, because your opponent will trade out a card into it. So hopefully that makes sense, and I didn't mean to ramble on there, but yeah, I was trying to really just get my point across. Next up, we've got the Simba. I'm only opting for 3 of these, and the reason why is because you do want some protection, but you want a lot of cards that you can use with the Rockstar Stitch. And so that's why you're seeing so many. I think there's like above 30 1 and 2 drops. We're finally just getting to the 3 drop curve here, as you can see with the dock. But we are playing something that can potentially recur cards, and recurring a Simba is potentially pretty strong to protect your board. So normally I don't think you'll necessarily want to go for Simba all too much, but in certain scenarios where you do want to level out that protection, it can help, let's say, protect your Merfolk to get another line of quest in, depending on, again, the matchup. If your opponent's playing a little bit of a slower deck and they only can develop 1 threat to take out your characters, maybe forcing them to interact with the Simba can be beneficial in that regard. Next up, we've got Doc, and we're playing Doc at 4. Doc is an overall good card, I think. The 2-3 stat line is definitely a little underwhelming, but the fact that on turn 4, when he can, if you play him on turn 3 and then you quest with him on turn 4, he can allow you to play out a 5-cost card. It can be a little relevant because you do play so many low-cost cards. You can likely develop a bigger threat plus a smaller threat at the same time, and then just put additional aggro pressure on the board. He also helps progress your lore state, but the bad thing is that when he does get traded out, you likely just lose him, and he doesn't trade out with the character like the Bonsai does, or should. And that's where this Moana solves the potential problem. This Moana is similar to Bonsai, a card that is overstated and quests for 2. It can be very difficult to out. It basically forces a Mim Fox interaction, which puts your opponent on the back foot already, because you're going to be questing for 2, and then you're forcing them to trade out tempo because they have to bounce a card with the Mim Fox, and then lose their Mim Fox if they trade into the Moana. If they're not on Amethyst, obviously this card can be a little bit more difficult to out, because again, on 3 when this comes down, basically if you're on the play, your opponent is not really going to have, I don't think, anything really in terms of just a solo character in order to deal with this. They're going to need something a little bit stronger, or throw multiple things into it to take it out. And so a card like this can definitely stick on the board for a couple of quests and really progress your lore state. One of the counterplay cards that we're opting to play here is going to be the Tinkerbell. This card, again, kind of a dual purpose, but in its primary role, it's an evasive double quester, and that's kind of what you want to use it for. But it's also unique because it can give evasive to one of your other characters. And where you might end up having some trouble in certain matchups is if you're going up against an opposing, let's say, not necessarily a fully aggro deck, but like an evasive deck that's kind of focused on aggro. And so being able to bring down Tinkerbell and then giving something like this Moana, the Bonsai, or anything else really, the ability to crash into your opponent's evasive threat can really throw them off and disrupt their game plan. So while it is good to just come down and be an evasive quester, giving evasive to something else on your team or on your board in order to take out an existing evasive threat like a Diablo or something is also very nice and good to have. Now again, because we're a budget deck and this card is 50 cents, I've also opted to include a couple of Hans. Now again, this is a card that you would normally never really play outside of a budget deck, but it is a 3/3 body that comes down on turn 4 that will turn sideways for 3 lore. So if you're just looking to edge out that last little bit of lore, this card can definitely help you close out the game. On the 4 drops, this is where you're going to start to establish some of your, more lore heavy threats, I guess you could say. While you're doing that to a certain extent with your lower end packages from turns 1 to 3, it's really on turn 4 where your opponent has to say, I need direct removal answers now for these cards. Otherwise, they are going to be hitting some big lore counts or just things I can't deal with, like an evasive Tinkerbell. Moving on to the 5 drop. The Pegasus is ideally what you want to set up here, the bigger Pegasus that is, with your smaller Pegasus and or your Morph. And it's one of the main reasons why we've opted to include Morph in this build. Because if your opponent is not on Ruby or not on Steel, which is a far ask because everything's on Ruby and Steel these days it seems, but being able to give your whole board evasive will protect it from being challenged, obviously. And this can be very, very powerful because this card coming down after, let's say, you've turned your Hans sideways and it's very vulnerable to being removed, now you can say, well, now I'm going to shift Pegasus quest and now my Hans also has evasive. So I can likely ready him up and quest with him on another turn. A card like this is what you want to use to close out the game with. If you're able to have a board that survives with just maybe 2 or 3 big questers, you shift the Pegasus, you give that board evasive, you quest with everything, and you force your opponent to have widespread removal because they likely won't be able to challenge your board. Otherwise, when you ready everything up, you just quest for game the next turn. So Pegasus is going to be one of your strongest closers and one of the main reasons why we're playing Morph, just to have these additional shift targets for the Pegasus. So again, an uncommon, very, very easy to come by. I think we hit the spot where there are the damaged sleeves. Nope, but there's some damage on this one it looks like, but okay. I'll double check the sleeves obviously before I hop into a match. But, yeah, definitely make sure we don't use those. All right. Again, sorry for any kind of glares and stuff, guys, but let me know how you find the video so far if you've made it this far. So no surprise here. I'm just going to cover them all together. Very, very cheap. I think I only have the foil queens now, but I did buy 4 non-foils for like $1.50 each. So again, I'm buying this stuff because I want to give this deck away. Or after I update it for set 6 maybe. But no surprise here, we've got Queens and we've got Rockstar Stitches. Rockstar Stitch is like a $2 card right now, $2 Canadian, so not very expensive at all. But the Queen, again, is just that early board pressure. If you're able to shift it out on 2, you can pressure a lot with removal for your opponent and just help maintain a bit of a board state. It also quests for 2 and is a big body that comes down. The Rockstar Stitch on shift 4 just gives you, in addition to your Hans and or Tinkerbell, another line of play depending on if you have Stitch and or Morph, right? So Morph, you can see the value that it provides in this deck, because let's say you have a Rockstar Stitch but you have no small Stitch and you're like, man, I don't really want to go for the Queen line, or in this matchup the Queen line is not going to be that good even though I have the 1-drop Queen and the 5-drop Queen. Maybe I play towards the Stitch instead because I need to set that up, or I can get that set up early and draw a lot of cards before my opponent's engines really get online. So yeah, this is your main draw engine. Again, not by any means the best draw engine. It's not a Rapunzel, it's not a Clarabelle, but in a budget state, this is what we're working with. So again, we'll test it and see if it's any good. But hey, it is still a 3/5 body that quests for 3 too, right? And there's been times, if you guys remember, playing against Rockstar Stitch where just having the threat of this shifting and questing for an additional 2 compared to the 1-drop Stitch questing for 1 is sometimes enough for you to close out a game. So it'll be interesting to see if this deck can be effective. The final 2 cards, which put us at 61 total, is going to be 2 Perditas. This card I'm surprised to see finally drop down quite a bit in price to about $4 to $5 Canadian. And so this is the most expensive card in the deck. It's a 2 of, but like I mentioned, because you're playing a Rockstar Stitch package that can exert all of these low-cost cards for extra draws, being able to play Perdita, bring something back, and then exert it if you have a Rockstar Stitch to draw, that's like so much card advantage, right? If you eventually get into this point in the game where you are going to be at a disadvantage if you get this far in the game, right? Turn 6, turn 7, your opponent's likely going to have top-end stuff to remove your stuff with. But if you are able to generate a bit of a grind game here, having a Rockstar Stitch on board, being able to play a Perdita, revive a low-cost card, have it come into play, and then exert it with the Rockstar Stitch to draw a card, you get board presence, you get card advantage. So that's kind of what we're going for with a setup like this potentially. Again, not necessary. Perdita in isolation is good on its own. Rockstar Stitch in isolation is good on its own. But there is some nice synergy that you could generate with this deck as well. So that is the full deck list and profile. Let me know if you did enjoy, if you made it this far. Sorry if things were a little bit choppy or glary. Again, your feedback is going to be super important in letting me know if we should continue on with stuff like this, maybe get some improvements by some lighting. I was thinking about buying a camera at some point as well, like a proper stream camera. So again, let me know. Matchups where this deck could be really good, again, depending on the lines you go for. Into slower Sapphire control decks, if you're able to get very close to closing out the game, being able to aggro them out before they get any setup going is very strong. The one thing I will say, when you go up against those kind of control decks, generally you start losing steam around turns 5 and 6, and they start developing a lot of their control aspects, especially if they're ramping with the Sapphire cards. So what you ideally want to do against like a Sapphire deck would be to have something to close the game out with before they start shutting down everything you play on the board. And so this deck doesn't have any non-questing sources of lore right now, which is a fundamental weakness here, compared to decks like Sapphire, which have Lucky Dime, or Amethyst decks that have Merlin Goat. You could opt to play some budget locations in this deck, which might be a little bit challenging for the opponent to remove, if they have to choose between removing characters and or removing locations, because this deck is just a straight 60 characters. And so again, you could play something like Mufasa in here, but if you play Mufasa, you probably don't focus on a very low to the ground package playing like 30 1 and 2 drops, right? Because you want your Mufasa to hit big targets. So again, a lot of different strategies that you could think about and implement in here. Where this deck could struggle is into steel matchups. Into Steel Song or anything that's good against aggro is basically going to be good against a budget aggro deck, because those Steel Songs will likely just clean up a lot of your lower end threats, and they just have bigger hitters, like when they start dropping Tinkerbells and stuff like that. That's a real death sentence for aggro decks. But you do have some tools to combat it, like the Queen, like Pegasus, to make your stuff evasive, forcing them to use things like their actions and songs in order to out your threats. So there is still ways you can win the game. Again, you have to know your lines and what to play depending on the matchup, depending on the ink pairing you're going up against. Anyways, guys, that's going to wrap it up for this video. If you made it this far, thank you again for watching. Hopefully I didn't ramble on too much, but maybe I'll see you in some gameplay videos next. Again, make sure you drop some comments and a like if you did enjoy. Quantum is out.